who is the founder and current vice president of Donnybrook-Ballingup Community Radio. Welcome, Barry, to Esperance.
Thanks, Tina. Yeah, it's a great pleasure being here, and lovely place. We're really enjoying ourselves.
You jacked the weather, didn't you?
Perfect, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. So glad we could turn that on for you. So today we're just going to have a little chat about community radio as a whole and how it's evolved, and we'll get from you a sense of where it's going and maybe one or two of your most memorable moments on radio.
Right, okay. Well, I remember when it started. I think it was Curtin Uni started community radio in Perth, probably when I was a trainee as a radio tech in the 70s. But then we spent 2 years on Cocos Island in the 80s, and at that stage they had a little studio. It was before all the satellite communications, and they used to take Radio Australia off HF radio, shortwave radio. They used to rebroadcast that most of the time, but there was a studio and people could go in and do their own show. And there was a lunchtime weekdays, there was the Cocos Island News, which was essentially a gig guide of what was happening on the island. And I just saw, what a powerful community building tool it was. And then I'd been, after that, I ended up working as a technician for GWN for 14 years, and that was a great West Australian company, and we were broadcasting all over regional Western Australia, all out of Bunbury, and it was, I was at tech, and we used to answer the phone at night, and people saw GWN as sort of their TV station. But what's happened through time is that radio and TV and print media essentially in the regions has been bought by corporates and essentially shut down or lost their local identity. And it just makes community radio just so important, because I've stopped listening to mainstream media because their interests aren't the same as ours.
No, exactly. It's a lot of narrative or rhetoric, whatever word you want to use. So I think to have community radio in the actual community where people are is vital.
And, some of the times I've done has been a bit controversial, but the point is, I stand by everything I've broadcast, and that's the function of community radio, is to present a local narrative, and the Code of Practice specifically says that the community stations will provide a voice for elements of the community not represented in other media. And so, that's our function. There's no point in being like all the others. And I think increasingly with AI, it's getting harder and harder to trust anything. At least if personally know whoever's broadcasting, I'm more than open if I put something out that somebody's not happy with, let's talk about it. The byline of my community radio program's been it all starts with a conversation, and of course people don't know what they don't know.
I love that. Yeah.
And it's only through conversations that we can chart a middle line, because we seem to be polarised to two extremes at the moment.
Once upon a time we were able to have polite discourse and still walk away as friends.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it just seems that, dare I say it, we've devolved to where you can't have an opposing opinion and still, just agree to disagree.
Absolutely. And, both science and democracy are predicated on open debate. And free speech. If you can't have an open debate, we don't have science and we don't have democracy. And
100%.
That's been pretty apparent over the last 6 years. The truth will prevail, and it's coming out. It's not necessarily getting into the mainstream media, but people know. And I think, the mood of the people's changed.
Yes. Speaking of mainstream media, it has been heartwarming to see some opposing opinions or things coming out in mainstream. So that's really good. That doesn't negate the absolute need for community radio, but it's always good to see that what we and others like us have been harping on over the years about is actually making it. Yeah.
It is, and I take great pride in the fact that all the broadcasts I've done the last 5 years are online for the record. And a lot of those interviews are a bit like a good wine. They've sort of improved with keeping. Yeah. But, when you've got the likes of Karl Stefanovic, going from mainstream to independent media, they just can't keep suppressing the truth.
No.
And there's others that are going from mainstream doing their own thing. And so it's really a return to a private enterprise, free market sort of a system, which, I'm all in favour of.
I love seeing the variety of interviews that you do. You've interviewed quite a few people and other independent podcasts. I think it's a little bit disheartening that we have very, very few investigative journalists anymore.
Well, that's they've gone by the board. Jerry Roberts, who writes for The Light, he bemoans what's become of his craft. It used to be a craft, and they take pride in their work, whereas now they just sort of transcribe press releases. And that's not the function.
Rhetoric, It's not
the function of the media.
I mean, anyone can do that, read from a piece of paper, but to actually investigate and what's behind something, especially something so newsworthy it affects the population, I think that we shouldn't just accept what's on paper. We should critically think for ourselves.
Well, critical thinking, that's what's gone out the window. Yeah. You can get away, you can lie for so long, but once it becomes obvious that what you've been told is a lie, then I've been thinking for a long time we're going to approach a Berlin Wall moment. Berlin Wall, people put up with all that nonsense in Germany for a long time, but in the end they said no and stood up to it. Now, just what that was clear cut because the wall came down. Yeah. Just what this is going to look like, I'm not sure, but I think probably it's what's happening politically. With the assent of one nation. Yeah. That's people saying something's off.
I think you've hit the nail on the head with it. It's not going to be as clear cut as the Berlin Wall, but even if you look at that analogy, after the Berlin Wall, there was a lot of clean-up. And when the clouds break and the sun starts shining for Australia again, we're still going to have a bit of rubble to clean up. It's not going to be, the birds are singing rainbows and all of that sort of thing. Not to be disheartening, but it may get worse before it gets better.
I think you're right. And I think I gave a talk to Donnybrook University of the Third Age a month or so ago, which I called The Place for Community and Independent Media. And I generated a transcript of that and the audio is also on the Radio WA podcast. And, I conclude that we've got to be positive. There's a lot of negative stuff happening, but we've got to be positive because negativity breeds negativity, positivity breeds positivity. And I really think we've been through a dark age, and after the last dark age, there was the Renaissance. And I think we're on the verge of a new Renaissance because the frontier of science is understanding the biology in the soil and the biology in the human guts. If we get those things right, most health problems go away. And so this gets back to, what we eat. That's what determines our health. And it really means we got to get back to eating food the way local farmers have always produced it. And one bloke I know who had health problems and mental problems, he said he fixed himself by not eating anything with a barcode on it.
Well,
so, and this is what Robert Kennedy's talking about. We've got to get back to real food, which is, your fruits, your veg, your meat, your, whole grains, the foods that humans evolved in, which isn't the foods that are being handed out by the corporations these days on the basis of down on price. And this is a great conundrum. We're managing food on the basis of down on price, and the government's subsidising the sickness industry.
Yeah. As opposed to the whole food industry, like primary production and things like that. You're probably aware of Dr. Casey Means. She's written a book called Good Energy, and she says that, yes, there is room for modern medicine for acute conditions, but most chronic conditions can be managed by diet and lifestyle.
Absolutely. And, this is what, again, the Maha movement and Make America Healthy Again. And, some people think Maha, they think Trump and think bad, but when you really look into it, it just makes so much sense. And, the business model of the pharmaceutical industry is selling sickness. They've got no interest in health, and health starts in the soil, always has, always will.
Well, all businesses work on a how can I retain and how can I get more customers. So if the health industry was about health, about making people healthy, they would be losing customers. And I don't think the shareholders would be really happy about that. So it's like a cause and effect. The problem is created in some, not all cases, by the very people that also have the solution.
Absolutely.
I guess there's so much to talk about with, and speaking of talking, so grateful that you took time out of your day to come and actually see us in the studio. But Barry, may I do a little teaser for our listeners that this might not be the last time we hear you on 103.9?
Well, that would be nice, yeah. I just think community radio is so important. We can use programs in our own area, but the same content's online, so that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Stepping back to what you were talking about before about positivity for the future, and a great inspiration to both of us is Graham Hood.
Yes, Hoodie, he's lovely.
Pilot.
Yeah.
And, the analogy I see, the aviation analogy, it's like we're flying at 30,000 feet, one engine's just blown up, and the pilot's job is to get the aircraft on the ground, not chase after the mechanic who put the bolt in the wrong way round. The immediate priority is to get the aircraft on the ground safe, and once that's done, then we need to look at what's caused the problem and deal with it then.
Yeah.
And that's what we've got to do as a society. We've got to get Australia back on track.
Yes.
And then deal with, because there's no doubt in my mind that criminality has occurred in this process, and that does need to be addressed.
Perhaps treason.
Well, and then the other aspect of it is, we talk about the pharmaceutical industry, and as I said in my U3A talk, my training as a radio tech taught me to fix a problem, you've got to identify and then address the cause.
Mm-hmm.
Now, when you understand that the pharmaceutical industry is indemnified from vaccine injury, nobody would ever buy a new car with no warranty. Why does anybody ever inject a foreign object into their body with the supplier not being liable? It's elementary, dear Watson.
Yeah.
But
when you look at private businesses, they have to have liability insurance, and they couldn't. Like it's not just them saying, trust us, our product's good, with no background or no liability. No, there would be so many different government departments come after that business.
There's all these government departments coming after them, and then there's the insurance as well. So, it does need.
It's like make it make sense.
But as long as we can talk about it, we can work it out.
Yeah,
but if we can't, then we've got trouble.
Yeah. And for so long we weren't able to talk about it. And I guess we still, in some circles, have to be careful about how we talk about it, which shouldn't, as long as you're not, slandering somebody's name, then, like an individual or whatever, then that you should be able to talk freely about things. You're not doing anything immoral or illegal.
Yep. Absolutely.
So
it's the foundation of democracy.
Yes.
If you remove that, and I often say my dad, he fought in the Second World War. He crossed the English Channel on D-Day +1. He fought his way up to Belgium, and then he was shot and left for dead in October 1944. He was fighting a regime that controlled the narrative the same way governments have tried to control the narrative in Australia over the last 5 years. That's not healthy.
No, I have said to a few people, make no mistake, we are in the midst of war. It just doesn't look like the same battleground of previous wars.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, well, thank you for coming in today. Definitely want to hear more from you. And you've picked a song, and can you tell us a bit about why?
Slim Dusty's always been a great inspiration to me. He's a storyteller. He built a career out of telling Australian stories in song. And this song he wrote in the 60s, The Nature of Man. And I think there's lines in there like the small businessman is friendlier by far than the big boss with mansion so grand. And I think in the last consistently, but especially in the last 5 or 6 years, small business has been taken over by corporations, and it's a very unhealthy situation. And if we, as I believe in the private enterprise free market system, we've got to get back to a situation. If we want that, we've got to be in a situation where young people can establish a business in their own right, and not be so weighed down by government bureaucracy and all that sort of stuff. So, have a listen to Slim.
Thanks, Barry. Well, you've been listening to Tina, who's normally Tina's Talking Tunes on Tuesday, and I'll be back tomorrow, and Barry Green, founder and vice president of Donnybrook-Ballingup Community Radio.